Armando Iannucci's Charm Offensive, presented by Armando Iannucci.
Well, welcome to the show. In the week that Jonathan Ross received an OBE and his brother Paul received a visit from pest control, who'd been called out by worried neighbours. And it is, of course, also the week that Michael Jackson got off, which is how he got into trouble in the first place. Later on, we'll be looking into the circumstances that led to the not guilty verdict being given to this innocent piece of filth. And also, to celebrate the government's plans to ban religious hate, Charm Offensive is coming this week from St. Francis's Dominican Monastery in Hereford. Later on, we'll be speaking to some of the monks in the monastery and also to the women who also happen to be here. And, should be a load of fun. Let's meet tonight's guests. Please welcome Clive Anderson, Andy Zaltzman and Alexei Sayle. Hello. And we've got to kick off with first reactions to the acquittal of Michael Jackson. On Monday night, the prosecution case was left a bit like Jackson's face, in tatters, when the not guilty verdict was delivered by the jury, who, like Jackson's face, was mostly white. But despite being let off, mounting debt leaves Jackson's future, like his face, absolutely hideous. And what also does the future hold for Martin Bashir, who, if he doesn't get out of California quickly, may soon be, like Jackson's face, battered beyond recognition? So, any thoughts, any instant reactions to the verdict?
I think he'd be all right. He's got the Neverland. He could renaming it I Never Done It Land. But they think they're going to have to sell that off. So what he gains on the swings, he'll probably gain on the roundabouts as well. So.
Andy?
Well, I think it's probably time now that Jackson has been found not guilty to let him make a new start and put the events of the last 40 years behind him.
No, I think you've got to be careful because he was acquitted, and as the judge said, he leaves the court without a stain on his pyjamas. So he's absolutely, you've absolutely got to, be very careful.
All right. So what about the comeback? Will it be like his face, and that he can pull it off? Where now for Michael Jackson? Alexei?
I don't know, he hasn't made a decent record since Muller Kintyre, has he really? I think having Rudy Geller, isn't it?
Uri Geller.
Uri Geller as your mate.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's punishment enough for anybody.
I once read, this is absolutely true, I once read in The Guardian, it was an interview with Uri Geller, and it said Uri Geller was a very close friend of Michael Jackson, and it said, Uri has Jackson's ear. Actually, Uri Geller introduced him to Martin Bashir. So much for his psychic powers there.
Yeah, not giving an interview to Martin Bashir, something terrible always happens to everybody.
The other thing about Michael Jackson, his mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and so was he. Right into the 1980s, Michael Jackson would go door to door on behalf of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but because he was already famous, he wanted to sort of disguise himself. He always used to wear a sort of false beard. You open the door, and there'd be someone who looks a bit like Michael Jackson behind a beard, trying to make you become a Jehovah's Witness. Now, how spooky can that be?
But you still wouldn't invite him in, would you? You know what I mean? Yeah. Even if it was Michael Jackson, you'd still say, no, mate, I've got some fish fingers under the grill, you know. Can't talk to you about religion. Yeah.
Did you see the press conference of the jury afterwards? It's the strange thing they have in America. They're allowed to go on the telly and defend their anonymity in prime time. All the journalists were asking the jury questions, and they were. I've just realised this is going to go nowhere. I don't have something funny to say at the end of it, but I'll set it up, see what happens.
Can I workshop it?
Yeah, let's workshop.
Yeah,
it's a terrific space.
You've got to have the courage to fail, haven't you?
Yeah.
Abysmally, in front of an audience of hundreds.
Hey, Alexei, you've always had that.
Welcome to Radio Celebrity Wrestling, where two tip-top TV personalities from the 90s.
From the 80s, thank you.
I always do this. I always on this programme insult my comedy heroes. I had John Sessions on last week, and I had to stop him halfway through and say, "What the hell are you talking about?" Well, because we've been talking about squeaky-voiced guilt deniers, it's time once again to mention Jonathan King. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that Jonathan King wrote to me from prison saying that a lot of hilarious things happened there and maybe we should get together and write a sitcom about it when he got out. And how I said, no, you interfered with children. And this is true. Last week I got an anonymous email from prison, which said, "Dear Armando, I thought you may be interested to know that King regularly contributed to the prison newspaper Inside Time, whilst inside, predominantly writing book reviews, which invariably somehow got round to the topic that he was innocent. Attached is an article taken from the May edition where King wrongly imagines how the world has changed completely without him in it. It's from a regular column by Jonathan King called King's Corner, in which he writes, quote, "Prison life is generally very polite. Out here it's so different. Road hogs shout obscenities and hoot their horns. People and queues snap and snarl. In one day I got 2 £50 parking fines. It wasn't the fines I objected to. It was the gleeful delight and pleasure at causing another human being distress that lit up the faces of the wardens." Now, I think that what King hasn't realised here is that this doesn't happen to other people. It only happens to Jonathan King. Because he interfered with children. Well, anyway, knowing how much King loves publicity, we asked him to come on the show to talk about his situation. We did that for a laugh. Half an hour later, we rang him back and withdrew the invite. Explaining he couldn't come on because he interfered with children.
Is it not time, though, to let Jonathan King put the last 40 years behind him?
He looks like he's had a stroke, doesn't he, really, without having one?
That was one of the charges. Now then, Quakers, Methodists, Hindus, Protestants, Jews, Christians and Muslims. Don't you just hate them? Well, if you do, hurry up, because pretty soon it'll be illegal to incite religious hatred. And a damn fine thing it'll be too. Apologies to the monks there about the use of the word damn, by the way. So, what's the team's reaction to this impending threat to our freedom of speech, or is it a good thing?
I remember we did a sketch years ago in my last series called Ayatollah of Dibley.
Would that be allowed now?
I doubt it. It shouldn't have been allowed then. It wasn't that funny.
Andy?
I'm trying to launch, you say, my own religion. I'm trying to tailor it to the modern consumer. I've been sort of taking this door to door, asking people, if they would like their God, A, very forgiving, B, quite forgiving, C, vengeful, or D, incomprehensibly arbitrary. Also ask them whether they'd like their religion to apply A, the whole time, B, selectively as and when it suits, or D, deathbed only. Whether they're going to be following it with A, quiet reverence, B, mysterious bursts of spiritual excess, or C, tambourines.
That's the thing. I mean, if you say, let's, go and kill all Hindus, for example, isn't there a law against that already? Because if not, I'm going to go mad down Brick Lane tonight, you know what I mean?
Is it not just basic politeness not to kill all Hindus, though?
So if I started a religion that advocated the hatred of all other religions, presumably
it's been done before.
I'm fine. Oh, yes, it has been done before, yes. Yes, there are many examples. Well, that's the fundamental problem. Hatred is part of human nature. If God hadn't meant us to hate, he wouldn't have given us Jim Davidson.
I was brought up in the one true religion. I was brought up as a strict Presbyterian, and you can tell that's the proper religion because it's the only religion which is an anagram of Britney Spears. There's a message there somewhere, isn't there? Never mind 42 virgins, Britney Spears.
The message is you've had too much time on your hands.
Lexi, do you believe in an afterlife?
Yeah, well, I was sort of brought up Jewish, really, which is always useful in Liverpool because there weren't many Jews, so you could, if you wanted a day off work, you could always make up a holiday,
Are you trying to say that it was hard to get a day off work in Liverpool when you were being...
You're going for the Boris Johnson bursary and...
I love Liverpool. I love the fact that Liverpool, against all the odds, won the European Cup, and they still managed to end the season with a burning sense of grievance.
You don't know what it's like.
You've been south this long, but you've never lost that chip, have you?
I keep it for professional reasons, you know.
OK, well, I think we've sorted that. I noticed, though, that the monks were laughing at all that stuff, which indicates we've not really offended anyone. However, there has been criticism from some comedians recently that the bill against incitement to religious hatred will stop us telling jokes or ridiculing people's religious beliefs. Now, the bill's supporters have said this is nonsense. Religious people can take a joke and, in fact, are very, very funny themselves. Well, I'm going to put that to the test now because for the next 2 minutes I've sacked all my regular writers and replaced them with religious ones, and I've got them to write me a stand-up comedy routine, which I'd like to try out now in front of our audience. There we go. Here we go. Thanks very much for that round of applause. You're too kind. You're too kind, and the kind will be rewarded. Right. Have you ever noticed it's only born-again Christians who'll go to heaven? Why is that? It's because they've welcomed the light of Christ into their life and into their hearts. Moving right on now. But Jonathan Aitken dies, right? Jonathan Aitken dies and gets to heaven. And St. Peter says to him, go to hell because you lied and you made your daughter lie. I'm here all week, ladies and gentlemen. Two Methodists went into a pub and then walked back out again because they were Methodists. There were these three men, right? And they were in an aeroplane, and the pilot comes on and says, I'm terribly sorry, the plane's going to crash. But there are only 2 parachutes. And one of the men says, you take them, I'm a Sufi Muslim, and I'm awakening to the unmanifest or unseen world. It's the way I tell them. This man was having an affair, and he was up in the room with his best friend's wife, and he was caught, and she was stoned to death. Right, there were these 3 nuns, right? And they all thought, I'd love to snog a man, just once. So they all had psychosomatic disorders brought on by the intense restrictions to their emotional lives. And eventually one of them left. There's more. Did you hear the one about the Catholic priest who abused young boys in his care? No, because it didn't really happen. You've been terrific. Good night. Now we move on to a round called This Sherry Blair is Loaded and I'm Prepared to Use Her, which looks at criticism of the Prime Minister's wife for charging fees to make speeches in America on what it's like being the Prime Minister's wife. Speeches which consist entirely of just 2 words, quite lucrative. So, how did the team feel about Sherry Blair? What will she do next?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair to criticise them, and I myself don't get out of bed for less than £50,000. Mind you, I spend a lot of time in bed, obviously. But,
well, she's been accused of exploiting her position as the Prime Minister's wife, and I do think it's a bit off. I mean, he's not even been dead a week yet. So, at least bury the man first. Is that not public domain yet?
No. That'll be spooky, though, if he does die between now and the podcast. Yeah.
I know people.
Yeah.
Actually, Vaughan Savage was telling me that they are planning to say when Tony Blair does die, and they take all the normal programmes off there, and they're going to put this one on.
Along with repeats of the shipping forecast. But great radio. Also, I think if you're forking out...
It's awful.
You're not reading between the lines.
The shipping forecast coded messages. Is that what you're saying?
Damn right it is.
2 sailors.
They don't listen to the Radio 4 and Mariners. They don't like Money Box Live, do they? They must be really pissed off, Mariners, that they don't get, Capital Gold or something. They have to listen to, Woman's Hour and stuff, because otherwise they're going to sail into a storm. They must be Kenny Murray shouting at us about Celtic shillelagh music. We don't want... In fact, in the end, they just switch it off and steer straight into the iceberg.
We're wandering away from Sherry Blair. Sherry Blair's under a lot of criticism for taking money. Now, she maintains that this is just men being sexist because she's just a late middle-aged woman married to the Prime Minister. I think that's just an old wives' tale.
I genuinely, I don't know about the lecturing thing, but what is always seemed odd about the Blairs is that lust for freebies. You know, I mean, it's true that a lot of celebrities have it, that, you know, you couldn't get, you know, Madonna. You couldn't pay her. But if you offer her, like, a bag of balloons and a pencil, you know, she'd be doing it all the day in your front room, you know what I mean? She just... it is a real kind of moral vacuum that they have. There's a terrible greed. Can I take this water with me when I go?
But they would argue when they're very, very famous, and you'll remember this from the 80s, when you can't go out and buy balloons and pencils because you'll be mobbed, wouldn't you? That's why balloons and pencils are so exciting.
She's famous for sort of looting department stores and stuff, isn't it? When I was a kid in Liverpool, we used to call shoplifting, we used to call it affirmative shopping.
Where does she come from?
She's from Liverpool. She's a highly educated, talented woman from Liverpool.
Yeah.
All right, Clive.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
southern bastard. Sneering.
The only thing I hold against her is that she came top of her year in the bar exams, a very tough exam, and she came top of the year, and it was my year. And... and I feel
Don't
she was at the
pretend
top.
that she kept you off the top.
No. She was at one end and I was at the other. So we're the sort of the bookends of the year, I feel.
OK, well, we actually wondered what Cherie's actual rates were for the things she's prepared to do for money. So we rang her office up and we got her rate card for £50. So here's Vaughan Savage with Cherie's rates.
£60 will speak for an hour against chlamydia. £6,000 will speak for an hour in favour of chlamydia. £250 will go on a Channel 4 list programme and pretend to remember her favourite war films. £80 will fit a whole ham in her mouth. £20 will moan about her sexist treatment by journalists onto your home answering machine or as a ringtone. 50p will slap her husband and film it on her mobile.
We are a cash-driven society now, and recently Alistair Darling emphasised this by saying we're going to have to pay as we drive now, aren't we?
They're going to satellite tracking so you know where your car is. Mm-hmm. But you know where your car is, don't you? It's outside your house, isn't it, really? I mean, they had satellite tracking of your slippers or something. I mean, that'd be really useful.
Do you think we'll have that eventually? So when you go, I can't find my keys, you'll just press some device, which obviously you can't find at that point. And,
all the satellites are owned by the American military.
So all our pay-as-you-ride kind of systems will just get switched off if there's a military...
US military, yeah.
Every cloud.
Yeah.
Or they just start beaming information to our sat-nav systems that are actually meant for warheads. So suddenly drive 5,000 miles per hour into a Baghdad police station. Doesn't make any sense.
It is fairly typical of our two nations that America uses this satellite technology for the purposes of world domination, and we use it for traffic calming.
Right, well, fine. I think that's resolved that. Later on, we'll be introducing you to a man who's trying to commit suicide slowly by sticking his head in an oven glove. But now, as I mentioned earlier, this week's show is coming from a Dominican monastery in Hereford. And it's time now to talk to the very real monks that are actually here and the other high-pitched monks that are with them and see what they get up to during a normal monkish day. I have to pick up my microphone again. Hello, sir. What's your name?
William.
Brother William. Yeah. And is there a religion you hate the most?
Buddhists. They go around giving it the big I am.
What about you, sir?
I hate Quakers. They get on my f***ing tits.
And you, Mr. Monk, what do you like about being a monk?
Well, it's not all about beekeeping and chanting. Sometimes we tunnel out and beat up the locals.
And you, sir, tell us a little bit about your set of religious beliefs, starting with your eschatology, in Latin. Taking a vow of silence there. Thank you very much. The monks of the monastery in Hereford. Right, we now come to the part of the programme called Bring Me the Head of Anne Robinson. In this section, I pass the head of Anne Robinson, the recently botoxed hostess, around the panellists so that they can tell us in more detail what her cosmetically reconstructed face looks like. So I'm just going to bring out the head. The head here. There you are. Sliced through the neck here, which is, of course, her weakest link.
See, Anne Robinson is the only person who does, a passport photo would look like a Francis Bacon portrait of her, wouldn't it? There was a time, wasn't there, when Point of View was continually presented by somebody called Robinson. For a long time, wasn't it? Yes. Robert Robinson and...
Tom Robinson
Ulster,
was in there.
What's Robinson, that Ulster MP?
Ulster MP presented Points of View.
Yeah.
There's only one point of view. She was very good on Points of View. That cheeky wink she used to do at the end of the programme. But
she can't do that anymore.
Have you ever been tempted to have plastic surgery, Armando?
Why do you ask that of me so pointedly?
Well, you're being critical of Anne Robinson, and I just wondered if you were really secretly envying the fact that she's had a complete makeover.
It's not so much I'm critical of her looks. I'm very, very annoyed by the BBC's persistent belief that she is A, witty, and B, cruelly cutting. Whereas all she does is just question anyone ever says to her in a slightly dubious way. So if you go, I'm a man, she goes, are you now? Yes, I am. Well, I'll be the judge of that. Would you like some water? Oh, is it now? And inside, a little audience in her head are all cheering and whooping and thinking, you're great, Anne, you're so witty. You're so witty, the way you came back at that man with that man query. Really put him down. Look at him, he's a gibbering wreck. Outwardly, he's a man, but inwardly, he's melting. He's melting, he's shriveled up like your old face, but not your new face, because on the back of those magic insults, you can now afford to regenerate your face like Doctor Who every week, even though, ironically, on this week's Doctor Who, she was played by an android, a robot who actually had more facial expressions than Anne Robinson.
You really mean this, don't you? This comes straight from the heart.
Oh, yes.
Did she give you a bad review for something?
Was it actually part of her plastic surgery to have an audience implanted in her head?
Yes. OK, time now to look at longer school hours. Education Secretary Ruth Kelly outlined plans this week for schools to open early and close later to allow parents to work long days and to give troublesome children the challenge of even more school to get expelled from. So with the increase in after-school clubs, night classes and pre-breakfast clubs, are we entering the era of 24-hour schooling?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think, in fact, we should go beyond even 24 hours. Should have new hours in the day, between 8:30 and 8:30 every day, 3 extra hours.
Are we just feeding too much education to children? Are we battery educating? What are you looking at me like that for?
I just find it very liberating that I've just realised you can go on one of these shows and not have an opinion about anything. I've had a kind of epiphany while I've been sitting here. And, whatever, There's some good things about it and some bad, I'm not that bothered, really,
Blimey, Charles Kennedy better watch out for his position with you around. I think it's...
Or not.
Yes. Whatever. You've got to stay at school for all these late hours. There are people on ASBOs. They're wandering around at 10 o'clock at night. They're being breached of their ASBO and also playing truant at the same time.
Yes. And in 24-hour schooling, how does detention become a threat?
Who's going to look after the kids when they're in...
Well,
you haven't thought that through.
We haven't thought that through. Ruth Kelly, I think.
She's creepy.
She is. She's got a very deep voice as well, hasn't she? She sounds like a music teacher.
She's a beetle-browed loony. My opinion seems to be coming back, Doctor.
And finally, chavtastic and bounce-back ability are two new words to feature in the new edition of the Collins English Dictionary, full of all sorts of new words, new sexual practices like nut spatting and oral cupping, So we end by asking the team if they've got any other examples of new words or phrases.
Have they got doing a Paula Radcliffe yet? Because
Doing a Radcliffe? Oh dear, what does that involve?
Well, that just involves, well, peeing in the street in heroic circumstances.
It wasn't peeing.
Oh, wasn't it?
No. The number on her shirt was number 2, if you get my drift.
Well, I get her drift now, but
Anyway, I've got swasticating, which is to laugh at Prince Harry's terrible sense of humour.
Well, I think that Britain collectively has suffered a historyectomy in which we have lost knowledge of our history, and that's left us unable to conceive of the nation we are today. Take that one home.
Is there a word for not having thought about this bit when you're on a radio?
OK, well, you can have presented by Anne Robinson. That's a phrase that means to conduct a pointless exercise for more than 30 minutes. Asbo selector. That's a rubbish, rubber-faced, unfunny Channel 4 antisocial behaviour order.
Dear punter, someone who bets on Russian roulette.
excellent and bang up to date.
Argos.
Argos.
They're really good shops. Comedy was very different in the 80s, wasn't it? You didn't have to make no sense nor nothing. You just had to shout, Thatcher's a bastard occasionally, and you know. You got your own telling series.
Still works.
Oh, this still works.
Dear feedback.
Dear feedback.
She's a bastard.
In what way?
Oh, this is fantastic. Alexi Sale reforms.
The sort of end-of-term atmosphere to this show tonight, isn't it? That's it, we've covered everything. It's the last show in the series. Before we go, one of our greatest triumphs earlier in the run was getting the weather forecast changed on BBC television. It was through the voice of our listenership that we managed to get that changed. But there's going to be trouble ahead, because already Radio 4 are making alterations to their format of the weather forecast. From now on, there's going to include a new section on what different parts of the United Kingdom will smell like tomorrow. So we leave you here with the latest 24-hour forecast.
London, exhaust fumes, ciabatta, urine. Manchester, turbulent hot fat, scattered curry. Edinburgh, boiling guts, scotch. Glasgow, frying guts, scotch. Belfast, halitosis, pipe smoke. Dublin, stew, vomit, burning hair. Cardiff, lynx pulse, decaying fruit.
That's all for this week. Goodbye.
That was Amanda Iannucci's Charm Offensive, presented by Amanda Iannucci. The guests this week were Clive Anderson, Alexi Sale and Andy Zaltzman. It was written by Amanda Iannucci and John Holmes, Ian Martin, Will Smith and Danny Robbins. And the producer